Welcome to this afternoon's session on internet governance and privacy and data protection. We're starting before the bell, but hopefully we're not going to incur any fines or other retribution. This is the first session in the history of CPDP, I believe, where we have expressly, at least, tried to look at the intersection of two very large and somewhat diffuse policy areas. Internet governance on the one side, privacy and data protection on the other. Depending on how you define each of these policy areas, one could say that most of the history of this conference has, in fact, been talking about internet governance, but without using those words. Mind you, as many of you will appreciate, go back to the 1990s and indeed early 2000s, and the term internet governance was mainly used to describe the set of policy issues that arose specifically in connection with IP TCP-based communication. So a certain protocol for communication that was the internet, and governance of that protocol or set of protocols for communication was internet governance. And in that perspective, it was particularly the internet naming and numbering system that was regarded as internet governance. And a lot of the focus, as you probably are aware, was devoted to the activities of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers based in California. After the WSIS, however, the World Summit on Information Society, during the 2000s, and Meryem, who I'll introduce shortly, will come back to this, the notion of internet governance, as it were, ballooned semantically, so that nowadays you can say that internet governance deals with pretty much the entirety of telecommunications law and policy, which means that it swallows up much of what we are talking about today. But we're going to look at this intersection between internet governance questions and privacy and data protection questions in a little bit more detail in the course of the next hour or so. I want now to ask you a question, and that is, how many of you have ever participated in a session organised by the Internet Engineering Task Force, the IETF? One person, good. How many of you ever have participated in a session organised by the W3C, that is the World Wide Web Consortium? A few more hands, good. How many of you have participated in either the Global Internet Governance Forum or a regional Internet Governance Forum event, ETF? One person, good. How many of you ever have participated in a session organised by the W3C, that is the World Wide Web Consortium? A few more hands, good. How many of you have participated in either the Global Internet Governance Forum or a regional Internet Governance Forum event? Yeah. Each time we're getting more hands. I say good because I asked a similar set of questions back in 2003 to the International Conference of Privacy and Data Protection Commissioners that was then held in Poland. And there were several hundred people present in the audience, and not one person raised their hand to say that they had attended or even attended an IETF or W3C meeting. Now, that was before the IGF, the Internet Governance Forum, was set up. But nevertheless, back then, there was a very significant divide between internet governance community and the privacy and data protection community. And we see, though, over the last few years, that that divide is starting to dissipate. And this session, in a sense, is symptomatic of that, which is good, because the discussions going on in both camps need to relate to each other. On the panel today, I'm ably assisted by Ben Wagner, who is the moderator, and who will be asking questions along the way, also inviting questions from the floor. Ben is currently a postdoctoral research fellow at the Annenberg School for Communications at the University of Pennsylvania, and has just not long ago received his doctorate from the European University Institute in Florence. On the panel, we have, first of all, Meryem Marzouki, who is a senior researcher at the French National Centre for Scientific Research and a long-time contributor to discourse on internet governance specifically. We have then Christina Runegaard, who is the Director of Public Policy at the Internet Society, with its headquarters in Geneva. We then have Sophie Kwasny, who is the head of the Data Protection Unit at the Council of Europe, and indeed is really the person who has initiated this particular session. So don't give me the credit, it's really the Council of Europe and Sophia who deserve the credit for this. And finally we have Pat Walshe, who is part of the GSM association in the public policy department of that association, and developing policy particularly around privacy and data protection, security matters related to mobile communications. So I now turn to Meryem, who will give you a sort of potted history, as it were, of internet governance discourse with special attention to privacy and data protection matters. Meryem.
Thank you very much, Lee. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Sophie and the Council of Europe for not only for organizing this session, but also for inviting me as a speaker. As we have seen by your answers to Lee's question, we do have some intersection between the two crowds, the internet governance crowd and the privacy and data protection crowd, but not that much. And on this panel, but also in the room, we have some of the few people who you can see and meet regularly, both at the privacy and data protection conferences and at the global or regional internet governance events. So I was asked to give you some background and some history on internet governance and how this discourse has developed. And I guess the first question is, what is it about, actually? Lee touched a bit on this and on the evolution of between two different understanding of internet governance, from a rather narrow vision of internet governance related mainly to the management of what we call the critical resources of the internet, which are its infrastructure first, its protocols, and the management of a domain name. And that was the understanding, the main understanding of internet governance until the United Nations World Summit on the Information Society, the WSIS, completed its first phase in Geneva in 2003. This first phase, first of all, the summit was mainly organized by the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, of course, with the participation, the active participation of other UN agencies such as the UNESCO and others as well, but it was mainly an initiative derived from an initiative by the ITU, and the first phase was mainly supposed to discuss, at least in their understanding, to discuss the regulation of the telecommunication. But during the discussions in Geneva for 2 years or 2 years and a half until the first phase in Geneva in 2003, during all this discussion, the main battle on internet governance, because yes, it was a battle. I was there. I was representing civil society and co-chairing the civil society human rights caucus, and believe me, it was a true battle. So the discussions of internet governance focused mainly at that time on the internationalization of the domain names and their management, and also on the management of other critical matters of internet resource. If I can use a caricature at the step, the main discussion was, should it be the ITU? Should it be the role of the ITU to manage these resources, or should it be the role of another actor, which was already important at that time, but not well known as it is now, and which is the ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. I won't enter into details of the ICANN, because I know that Christine will talk about that, but it was one of the main political issues at that time, ICANN versus ITU. And the question of how to define exactly what is internet governance and what kind of internet governance process should we develop was not resolved by the first phase of WSIS in 2003, and it was left to a working group, an internal working group from the summit, to discuss and develop an understanding of internet governance. And this working group was called the Working Group on Internet Governance, or WGIG, and it comes after a longer process, discussion, dialogue. It came with a definition of internet governance for the second phase of the WSIS, of the summit, which was held in 2005 in Tunis. And this definition, let me just read it, is as it reads in the Tunis Agenda for the Information Society. The definition is: internet governance is the development and application by government, the private sector, and civil society in their respective roles of shared principles, norms, rules, decision-making procedures, and programs that shape the evolution and uses of the internet. There are some key words in this definition. First of all, let me say that this definition is quite compliant with the usual definition of political governance, including in other fields that the internet. But the important words are shared, principle, norms, rules, etc. So it means that, okay, it should define a consensus between different actors on what are these principles. And thanks to this definition, we came to the new understanding of internet governance, which is embracing almost any and all types of regulation, including that of content and behavior in the online world, which means that includes freedom of expression, freedom of speech, etc., and of course privacy and data protection issues. Now, and we can develop this during the discussion, there are also other important issues, which are at which level internet governance should apply? Should it apply at the infrastructure level, at the protocol level, at the application level, or at the content and usage level? Who should be in charge of internet governance processes? Which actors? Should it be only public actors, namely government, or should it be open to a discussion to other private actors, which are the private sector, of course, but also civil society and other kinds of stakeholders? Where should this discussion occur? At which level? Should it be only at the global level or also at the regional, like the European level, or the national level? And of course, which outcome should be expected from all these processes of dialogues? And I hope I will stop here, and I hope we will have time to go deeper into details for these issues.
Thank you very much, Meryem. I think that was very interesting. I'm sorry we have very short presentations, and I'd just like to emphasize at this point, there's lots of people in the room. We are not just asking for questions, we demand them. This is meant to be an interactive panel, and I have absolutely no interest in just talking to you and not hearing anything back. So please, if you're angry, frustrated, or just confused, please let us know. So just to start with a simple show of hands, who here understands what internet governance is? Please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Oh, not bad. That's like almost 10 people. Congratulations. Good for you. I realize that we're basically here as internet governance people trying to convince privacy and data protection people that this matters. And that's not an easy task, as I can see in the room. But I'd just like to start with a very simple question to Meryem, and then I'd like to invite you to follow up. What have you been fighting for in the last 10 years? You say it's been a battle. What has the battle been for? What's the struggle for? Why does it matter?
As far as I'm concerned, I have fought mainly to have human rights, and in the holistic understanding of human rights, to have them taken into account in all internet governance discussions and in all internet governance outcomes or procedures that could be defined. Actually, and this is very important for privacy advocates, privacy is a human right, is a fundamental right, and I confess that we would like to see more representatives of privacy advocates in these processes. So why should you participate to this kind of processes, and the main one being the Global Internet Governance Forum each year? Why? Because as we have in data protection, privacy and data protection conferences, but probably much more, we have this whole discourse on human rights, and in the case of privacy, for instance, that privacy issue and data protection issues should be balanced. We very often hear this word of balance with security issues, now cyber security issues, and I think we need your help. We need to have more privacy advocates in there, because these internet governance forums, even if they don't have practical outcome, they don't make laws, of course, but they shape the political agenda. They shape the political discourse. And when attendees from governments, from the private sector, from civil society also come back to their country, they will influence the legislation and or the regulation on these different matters, and in this example on privacy.
Are there any questions in the room to respond to that, or would anybody like to help Meryem at the next IGF? Is anybody here? At the front? No questions? No further comments? The last IGF was in Bali, the next one is in Istanbul, the one after that is in Brazil. Seriously, you don't want to go to an IGF? Okay. Clearly it's not yet interesting and deep enough for you to fully understand why it's so deeply important that you participate. Sure there's no questions? Right, that's a very interactive audience. We will at some point have to drag you up here if necessary, but there will be questions, I guarantee you. But if there's no further questions, I'd like to move on to the next speaker, which is Christine, who's going to be speaking on standards bodies.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and let me echo the comments earlier. First of all, thank you to Sophie and the Council of Europe, and of course to Lee and Ben, and please do interact with us. We'd like to have a conversation. So just to follow up, just to be clear, once upon a time, the scope of internet governance was considered to be relatively narrow. So how do you manage internet resources? But today, I think most people would say internet governance includes privacy, and this is why you should pay attention. There seems to be a bit of a theme today of intersection. So the intersection of the internet governance community with the intersection of the privacy community. So I'm going to continue that theme and talk about the connection between the technology community and the policy community, focusing on privacy. And I'm going to introduce you to the internet technical community, but just let me say at the outset, there's insufficient time to introduce you to the whole community, so I'm going to focus on two aspects. I'm going to focus on the Internet Engineering Task Force and the W3C. Now, as you may know or you may not know, the things that make the internet work, the protocols and the standards, are developed in a variety of standards organisations, and two of the key ones are the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF, which works on the protocols that make your email work, that allow you to do VoIP calls, the TCP, and then the W3C, World Wide Web Consortium, which does web standards. And I thought it might be interesting, in case you didn't know, that those two organisations are already doing a lot of work on privacy. So let's start with the IETF. So the IETF has been considering privacy in standards development for some time, but in the more recent history has adopted a more standardised approach. And shepherded by the Internet Architecture Board Privacy Program, they produced a document which provides guidance to Internet protocol designers. It's called Privacy Considerations for Internet Protocols, and it's called an RFC 6973 in case you want to look it up. And what that document seeks to do is to explain in terms that internet engineers can understand how they should think about privacy when they're designing protocols. The W3C is also doing a similar exercise. They have what's called the W3C Privacy Interest Group, and if you're interested in joining, please come and see me afterwards. I'd be most interested. And in that group, what we're trying to do is develop similar guidance, but at the web layer, so for web standards developers. So developing guidance on fingerprinting, more general guidance on privacy. We're also trying to work on a way of developing a model for a process for reviewing web specifications, and we've already started doing some very informal privacy reviews.
Christine, can I just ask quickly?
Yes.
Those things that you're saying now, how will they actually, when they're implemented, change people's lives?
Well, hopefully.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. I'm optimistic. So the first step is when people interact on the internet, they want to be able to choose how their data is handled, what they can share. They want the ability to keep the data confidential or not, as the case may be. We need to think about privacy not just in terms of law. We also need to think about privacy in terms of protocols and standards, because those are the things on which many of the applications and services that internet users actually use are built on. And it's important to start thinking about privacy early before you start implementing and before you start deploying. So let's take an example. So one of the tricky questions in the web context is every time you add functionality, so more features, more options for applications and services, which users want and often, there's a trade-off. it becomes easier to do browser fingerprinting, the more features that you have. And so it's important that you think about, is this functionality necessary for the application and service to work? Is there a more privacy-respecting way that will give you the same sort of functionality, but also gives users a bit more privacy protection?
So basically, if we build better standards for technology, then we won't need to rely on laws that much?
Oh, I wouldn't go that far. No. You're asking a deliberately provocative question. You can't solve. That's right. You can't solve privacy with technology alone. Privacy has to be solved in many different ways, and laws are very important. Technology is important. Social elements are important. The economics is a very tricky question. We could just spend the whole afternoon talking about the economics of privacy. And one of the problems is, and this is not really related to what I was talking about, but we have a situation where there is significant power asymmetry between citizens and consumers and large providers. We also see a lot of aggregation, concentration of services and internet intermediaries, and therefore we'll also see the concentration of data as well, which leads to additional problems.
But then basically what you're saying is to many of the policy wonks and other people in the room, I'm sure that it's not enough to just lobby the Commission or the European Parliament, but if you want to contribute to privacy on the internet, you also need to focus on the standards bodies to make sure they're developing privacy compliant standards, essentially.
So what I would say is it's important that the policy privacy people speak to the technology privacy people, because the two things are related and they need to work in tandem.
Okay, that sounds perfectly reasonable. It's a question, I guess, then of finding the way to make sure that people in the room are convinced about, these issues, and that they're also interested in asking questions. And we have our first question, so please, can we get a microphone to this person? Back left. 1 second, just wait till we have a microphone, otherwise people can't hear you. There's a microphone right behind you. Although I'm sure you're very loud, we also have a web audience, so...
Thank you. Roger Clark, and I'm going to wear the hat of the Australian Privacy Foundation, Christine, even though I'm also on the Internet Society of Australia board. My issue is when IETF and various other organs are trying to understand particular sets of values, and we're focusing here on privacy, of course, how do you go about outreach? As chair of the Australian Privacy Foundation, do I get a phone call or an email from you saying you must get a person onto our working party? Do you get to the Electronic Frontiers Australia? Now, map that onto every country that's represented in the room. Does the process include that? Because my concern has been, as somebody who's drifted from the pure IT arena towards the policy arena over 40 years, that there's a gulf between those two sets of communities, and it isn't crossed sufficiently well. And unfortunately, the onus is on ISOC, the onus is on W3C, the onus is on all the other I's to jump over that gulf and draw the relevant kinds of NGOs into the game.
Thank you very much, Roger, and that's a very good question, and it's a difficult one. How do you effectively bridge the two communities, particularly when for technologists the privacy policy and legal space is complicated and overwhelming, and for the policy and legal privacy experts the technology space is completely overwhelming. And outreach between the two communities, both ways, is very important. There are a number of ways of doing this. One of the things that the Internet Society is doing is to try and open the door to the Internet Engineering Task Force to policymakers. So we have a program to bring policymakers to the IETF so that they can experience the way work is done there, understand the issues that technologists are thinking about, but also share from their perspective what they see as policy issues. And it's done in a way that policymakers are able to sit down one-to-one with technologists, ask the questions that they want answered, and participate in the IETF. And I understand it's quite an eye-opening experience for policymakers who are very used to a formal environment. The IETF is very informal. You can participate in different levels, even just by joining a mailing list. And it's a process, I think, Roger. We can continue to do more, and I'd really like to hear ideas from anyone either now or after of how we can improve that interaction between those communities.
Thanks. There's a quick question at the back, please.
Marie-Georges, I don't know how it can be qualified, but many people knows me. Are you going to ask the IETF to reopen the recommendation on cookies? I tried desperately to discuss with them at the time they were writing in to say we need the qualification of purpose. What is the purpose of that cookie? Okay, you say who is going to put it? What will be the content? How long? But you don't tell people what is the purpose. And as you know, in data protection, the first issue is the purpose legitimate? So once we have that, we will be much better to manage cookies. So if you open that discussion, I will be your friend. Thank you.
Sounds like you have a friend in the room. Would you like to respond?
Thank you, Marie-Georges, and I'm very happy I have at least one more friend. I can't really answer for the IETF, so I have to be clear about that. That's not within my remit. But as an individual and as from the Internet Society, my observation about the work that the IETF did on HTTP cookies was quite some time ago. And I think it probably would be fair to say, again, this is just my opinion, that probably when the technical documents that specified that technology were developed, there was no contemplation of the use that they would be put to. There are many different reasons why cookies are used. Some are to... Anyway, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. But I'd like to follow up with you in this discussion following the session, if I may, because that's very interesting. Thank you.
Sounds great. So maybe we'll see some movement on cookies on that sometime soon. So moving on, we have Sophie Kwasny from the Council of Europe, another important forum working on privacy and internet governance issues that would also like to convince you that you need to engage more. Please.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and thank you, CPDP, for allowing an unconventional topic to slip in the privacy and data protection. So the Council of Europe has been active in the field for a number of years now, and so I want to echo some of the points that have already been made. Marisa in the front row reminds me of an anecdote of the IGF in Baku, where one of the representatives of your firm was presenting the privacy policy. And I think he was coming from Asia. And in the room, there was no European person knowing about the data protection discussion with Google on the privacy policy. And I felt that this was a pity because we only had one view presented. So myself, I just raised the point that this was being discussed. And we know now how it's been managed in 2 countries at least. So at that point, so that was in 2012, I thought really we need more privacy experts in the room because systematically on the agenda of those events, whether the global one, the IGF, whether the regional one, you have panels, workshops dealing with privacy questions, be it do not track. We organized one on this in Baku precisely, be it on mass surveillance, which is a more recent topic, privacy impact of connected TV, whatsoever, but there are very frequently some discussions reaching privacy impact and not enough privacy experts to discuss it. So that was the idea. So the Council of Europe in particular started over 6 years ago with the initiation of the European version of the IGF, that's the Eurodic. The first one was held in Strasbourg, and since then we have been constantly active and trying to really develop it. The next one will be held this year in Berlin in June, so I all invite you to be there 12th and 13th of June. There was already a call for proposals of the themes, and from what I've seen, there are there again proposals touching upon privacy and data protection. One point that was made by Meryem, which is very important and which fully matches the Council of Europe impression on that, is that when the Council of Europe started getting involved in this discussion, the reaction from the persons present were, why is the Council of Europe there? What are you doing? What's your message? And we were saying, look, we're here to defend and promote human rights. That's the Council of Europe task. And we think that it's particularly relevant to discuss human rights in the context of internet governance. And this wasn't well received at the beginning. I think we need to acknowledge the shift and the fact that now, increasingly, those discussions are being raised and acknowledged, but it wasn't so at the beginning. So that's a positive progress. The Council of Europe is working as a regulator, but also, so that's our standard setting, and we are also having monitoring bodies to evaluate the implementation and cooperation activities. And I will take in all these some examples of how our activities impact the field of internet governance. So far, it was pretty scattered. We have various sectors in the Council of Europe that were dealing with topics that were related to internet governance or had an impact, but there was no comprehensive vision. I will mention, for instance, the hate speech campaign, our convention on the counterfeit of medicines. We have a convention on sexual abuses of children, data protection convention, and all of us, we were working in our own side, cybercrime convention too. So as you see, a number of instruments, a number of fields, but there was no holistic vision until in 2012, our Committee of Ministers adopted our Internet Governance Strategy that tries to bring together all our initiatives and go in one single direction. And I would just read the objectives of this Internet Governance Strategy, which basically sets the action the Council of Europe is doing from 2012, when it was adopted, to 2015. So the main objectives include protecting the Internet's universality, integrity, and openness, maximizing rights and freedoms for Internet users, advancing data protection and privacy, enhancing the rule of law and effective cooperation against cybercrime, maximizing the Internet's potential to promote democracy and cultural diversity, and protecting and empowering children and young people. So those are the areas we're trying to be active in and contribute to the IG discussion. In the field of cooperation, we were proud until a few weeks ago to have finalized a cooperation project with Ukraine. We were proud because there, again, the vision was holistic. It's a project on information society aimed at develop the capacity of the Ukrainian actors in 3 fields. The first one is media freedom, second one is internet governance, and third one is data protection. So this project will only start, well, actually it started yesterday officially. We are just now a bit concerned about the developments in Ukraine, but we do hope that the work we will be able to do there for the next 2 years will certainly lead to a change that is dramatically needed. So there, this is really concrete action in the field with a particular country. For the standards, I invite you to go on the website of the Council of Europe. There are numerous standards relevant. I will just mention 2. In 2011, a declaration on Internet governance principles, and also a recommendation from the same year on the protection, promotion of the universality, integrity, and openness of the Internet. Speaking about concrete actions and trying to translate this field in a way that touched the users, one of our recent initiatives was to prepare a guide for Internet users on human rights. So it's trying to translate the European Convention on Human Rights in a simple way. What does Article 8 on the right to privacy mean for an Internet user? what Article 10 on freedom of expression implies, what are the remedies. Meryem was involved in that work, and there the difficulty was really to try precisely to translate in a very clear and user-friendly manner those legalistic concepts and rights. And this is shortly being finalized, but I think it's a good piece that will contribute to the work. Okay, I should stop. So just one last point. The motto of the Council of Europe in the field is maximum of rights with a minimum of restrictions. That's really the line of action. And I invited you to note the Berlin dates, 13 and 14 of June, but also the dates of the next IGF, the global one, in Istanbul, 2nd to 5th of September. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. I just have a quick and slightly bemused question on one specific topic. You were mentioning the 12th and 13th of June. Those are the dates of the Eurodig in Berlin? Well, no, I was just amused because when you mentioned the dates, I thought it couldn't be possible that people in Brussels wouldn't know about that until I realized that...
I should check.
Well, no, it's worse than that. The European Commission and various research institutes have decided to organize the 5th European Summit on the Future of the Internet on the 12th and 13th of June.
In Berlin.
In Brussels. So...
okay, I'll check the dates.
No, I can show you, it's here.
No, your dates, but the Berlin, the Eurodig dates.
So I was just slightly confused because, no, it's a genuine question. If there's like a policymaker, somebody from the Commission or somebody from the European Parliament, and they're told the 5th European Summit on the Future of the Internet is taking place at the same time as the Eurodig, should they stay in Brussels or should they go to Berlin?
It's a good question. Let's check the Eurodig dates.
Okay, sure.
My connection is...
In the meantime, while you're wondering which city to travel to, are there any questions in the room to specifically what was... Please, the front. I think you're right.
12th and 13th of June.
Mm-hmm. Same 2 days.
Unbelievable.
I also have my graduation on the Friday, so it's like I'm familiar with the dates. They're a pain. Please, question at the front.
Hi, I'm Marisa from Google. It's a question for Sophie. As you know, the privacy community, the classic privacy law community very well, but you also obviously have been involved with other bodies that deal with internet governance in that kind of conversations. Is there anything in the way that the intergovernance people deal and decide things and discuss things that you think should be taken into that we could learn, so the privacy community, the classic privacy community could learn also in the way that the internet governance community involves lots of people? Do you think that is something that we should also look at?
Yes, and myself, I've been trying to bring back the IG competence expertise in my work in Strasbourg. Indeed, I think one of the points that was mentioned was the need to have more discussion between technology experts, legal experts. It's true that me, for instance, in my committee, they're all mainly legal experts. And I've been trying to bring them and make them more aware of the technology discussions. One example we had, but there it's different, but we had ISO coming to our plenary meeting to speak about their standardization efforts, what they're working on. And this is a dialogue, it needs to go both ways, clearly.
Are there any further questions? If not, I just have another one, which is that we've been hearing from several people now that there's lots of conferences to attend. And as we've just found out, that's not obviously easy. No, but seriously, let's assume you go to the IGF, you go to the Eurodig, you go to a IETF meeting, you go to a Council of Europe meeting, and you don't have much of a life left. No, really, I mean, and they overlap as well. So if you now sort of put your mind for a second in the shoes of a policymaker or somebody who's doing internet policy here in this room, how do they justify to their boss that they need to be at a conference a month the whole year just to have some kind of impact in internet privacy and policy?
Well, I think it depends on the objectives of each and everyone and what you want to gain out of it. But another key response is remote participation. In each of those events, it's developed and everybody can participate remotely, either following or even as panelists contributing to a discussion. This is really one of the key aspects that is promoted in those discussions, so everybody should use it at home.
Fair enough. Are there any further questions in the room? If not, then I think we'll move on to the next speaker, who will give us some insights on the IGF if we can get him a microphone. Yes.
Well, before it's a pleasure to be here, by the way. Could I just ask, before I begin, how many of you access the internet via your mobile devices? Thank you. You're keeping me in work. So I work for the trade body that represents 800 mobile phone operators around the world. But before I get onto the IGF, which I did attend in Bali, I know it's a tough life sometimes. I wanted to just address this issue of shared principles. Meryem talked about internet governance is about shared principles, about rules, around norms, around policies and procedures that shape. And this comes into Christine's area about the architecture, the standards, the openness, access to the internet. And to take Sophie's point, increasingly, internet governance has been about shaping policy on cybersecurity, on privacy and security. So what does this mean for mobile? I think for me, more and more people are connecting to the internet via mobile devices. And let's just throw a couple of statistics in here that we can ground this on. The world's population is currently 7.1 billion people. 61% of those who have access to the internet, 61% of the world's population don't have access to the internet. 77% of those that do are in the developed world. Now, the world's population is 7.1 billion, and there are 7 billion mobile connections currently in the world. And of those 7 billion, there are 4 billion mobile subscribers. And of those 4 billion mobile subscribers, only about 1.2 billion are in the West. There are 2.2 billion mobile internet connections made. And in Kenya, 98% of people access the internet via mobile phones. So what does this have to do? So Christina talked about standards. Remember, this is also, the internet governance is also about shaping standards and the architecture. And in mobile alone, not only do you have the W3C and IETF, and by the way, these two bodies couldn't agree on the standard for geolocation privacy. So you also have the European Telecommunications Standards Institute. You have the Third Generation Partnership Project, which looks at 3G mobile standards. That includes 6 other standards bodies. If I'm looking at the connected car, which is going to be big, then we also have the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, who also have a role to play in privacy and security standards. So the reason that I've raised all that is what does that mean for governance, particularly when we're talking about the fact that the majority of the people in the world that are using mobile, for example, are not in the West. And this is a global perspective. I think one thing we could do to encourage greater participation in this debate is at forums like this, and this is one of the better forums, is to encourage, for example, the Internet Governance Forum South Africa wrote a paper particularly looking at internet governance from a mobile perspective. I think we need to seek out some of those stakeholders and get them involved. I think the other thing for me, why mobile? Well, more and more people are using the internet. For me, my main form of connection to the internet is my mobile device. I probably spend 12, 13 hours a day on this device or my other device, very little on my laptop, and certainly a fraction of the time on the desktop at home. Well, what that means is that mobile actually is a highly regulated environment, and I know that we've got one of the experts in the room down there who hopefully won't ask me any tricky questions later. So not only is mobile regulated by data protection laws, so in Europe you're all familiar with 9546, well, you know, wonderful. Mobile operators very much also have the e-privacy directive to comply with, and they also have telecommunications license conditions, which may impose restrictions on what they can and cannot do with customer data. It may impose obligations to maintain capabilities to intercept people's communications, to retain their data, to disclose that data to law enforcement. So we have these other issues, I think, that are creeping in to the Internet Governance Forum, which haven't previously been discussed very much. And I think we've also got to remember that that mobile is connecting people, and mobile will connect the next billion people to the internet. That's without doubt. I've seen the stats, I've seen the work that's been done, particularly in the developing world. And we have to also consider that many of these, that some of these networks are also owned by the state, and the state also has the ability to impose certain requirements. So this affects internet governance as well. And so for me, how do we facilitate dialogue on how you can support innovation, how you can create social and economic and political opportunities for people? Because that hasn't been discussed. Now, we did go to Bali, I've got about 30 seconds probably, and we talked about the role of mobile data, of mobile-derived data, big data, to meet some very pressing social problems and some public policy objectives. And that could be, how many of you are familiar with the Haiti earthquake? And the role of mobile records, for example, used to understand where people have moved to after the earthquake in order to target them with humanitarian aid. I was in Kuala Lumpur recently, and I spent 2 hours one day in a traffic jam. I was in Brazil just before Christmas. I was there for 5 working days. 1 full working day was spent in traffic jams. Now, mobile phone records can, and that generates an awful lot of pollution. And in Europe alone, across the 28 member states, it's about €1 billion a month to address the health impact of air pollution brought about by vehicle pollution. And think of what data can do to help achieve some of those external costs, to improve people's well-being. And so a challenge we've got, I think, in this internet-connected age, because it is all of this data that's being generated by being connected on a mobile device to the internet, where you have internet-connected urban sensor environments, etc., then we have to ask ourselves questions about how we deal with that in the governance forum, for example. Or do we just leave it to local rules, local laws?
Just a quick question there, then, direct response to that. So you mentioned all of the wonderful things mobile data was able to do in Haiti in response to the earthquake. Do you think that could have been done if Haiti was subject to the European Data Protection Directive?
Yes.
Okay, that's good to know. I'm not sure that that necessarily means that the people's privacy would have been protected, but more generally, is it reasonable to suggest that it's okay for people to give up all of their privacy and sort of create an NSA-like world in return for less traffic jams?
I don't think it's an NSA kind of world. I think if we look in Europe, you have the e-privacy directive, which places a very clear obligation on mobile operators, not on internet players, by the way. And here's another little stat for you. So in Europe, you have mobile operators who are subject to these very precise rules that say you erase or anonymize traffic data and location data on termination of a communication. But those same rules don't apply to internet players such as WhatsApp, who processed recently 27 billion messages in one day. So those rules require to anonymize data. So that process of anonymization creates these insights. And yes, I know we've got some great people in the audience, and I'll look at one there who's done great work on re-identification, and there are challenges, but we're working on these, particularly in the developing world.
Are there questions from the audience that would like to respond to that? Please, over here. You said you had a great person in the audience. You've got a great question from the audience, so be happy.
I wish I'd written the question for him earlier.
It's too late for that now.
Pat, as a dispassionate observer, how confident are you that the internet is capable of any form of effective governance? And I ask that when we look at the chaos that we've had with just 28 countries in Europe trying to figure out a data protection regulation among friends. What the hell chances do you think there are going to be about agreement on a much broader range of issues with a much uglier range of countries? I appreciate that they're glorious talking shops, and it's necessary to go and talk at these talking shops. But what realistically, what prospects are there of very much concrete success, other than for the suntan industry?
Well, I think if we look at particular areas, I think it is a real challenge, and you're right. But I think if we look at one of the objectives of internet governance is to come up with common and shared principles, and I think that is possible, and I think that's actually necessary, whether that is in freedom of expression or whether that, for example, is in the use of mobile records in the developing world to meet a number of very real pressing public policy needs. And you know, we can't sit here in the comfort of a Western environment and talk as if we know precisely what people who are starving and people who have had their homes and their livelihoods literally washed away in disasters, we can't sit here and pontificate and say that it's not worthwhile. And I do believe in those instances, because the thing that I argue for in what I do is that just because there are no laws doesn't mean to say that people are not entitled to the same privacy protections, the same respect for their privacy. And it is our job to ensure that we do respect and protect people's privacy and find a way to do that. And that's what we're working on in the use of mobile records, for example.
There's another question at the front, please.
Well, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, you've said that you're hopeful, but we saw just over a year ago the ITU completely broke down. I mean, do you have any faith that such talks will be renewable, or that we can find some sort of consensus?
I think those discussions are going on at the moment, aren't they? So,
Meryem, do you want to jump in there briefly?
Yeah, may I add, on the previous question, it's true that these IGFs and this meeting are mostly talk show, but I would like to give you an example, a concrete example of an achievement. Okay, we talk and we discuss a lot, and we travel a lot, but sometimes we organize. I mean, the most active actors attending the IGF, sometimes they organize in coalition. And I would like to mention one of these coalitions, which is the Internet Rights and Principle Coalitions, a coalition made up of civil society groups, individuals, but also intergovernmental organizations like the Council of Europe, some governments like Sweden is represented, etc. And this coalition worked on a charter of human rights and principle for the Internet. And this took a long time, almost 2 years to develop this, and we have at least on privacy and data protection, we have 2 pages full of clauses. And what we tried here for each human right is to translate the Universal Declaration on Human Rights on a very practical level in the online environment. So this is a work by the Internet Rights and Principle Coalition. Not only we have this, but then the Council of Europe decided to institutionalize this work, and it started this committee of experts that has developed this guide on human rights for Internet users mentioned by Sophie. And it's not only a guide for Internet users, it's the annex of a recommendation to the member states of the Council of Europe, 47 member states. It's not a binding instrument, but it's still an important instrument, an instrument that this kind of instrument are referred to in the European Court of Human Rights judgment, for instance. So this is one example of concrete achievement.
Next session will start in 10 minutes.
Okay, in that case, are there any further questions that you would like to add? Please, over here.
Hi, my name is Philipp Schütz. I'm working for the Fraunhofer ISI, and I'm a political scientist. I'm saying that because I'm interested in issues like legitimacy, accountability, independence of all these international bodies you were mentioning. I know for the ICANN, for example, that there are problematic relationships to US agencies, US administration bodies. So maybe you can say something about that. And also the other thing, already before Snowden, people knew that secret services, law enforcement agencies were really interested in standardization of frameworks. So maybe you can also say something about that, about the role of these entities in the work you're doing.
Can I just add on top of that question? I think that you were far too nice in the question, and that, no, as a political scientist as well, legitimacy and accountability are huge questions that remain completely unanswered in internet governance. Nobody has a clue why any of this is supposed to be legitimate. But please, would the panelists like to respond?
Okay, about ICANN. I think they're trying to work it out. There was a high-level expert group that was established at the end of last year. Our Secretary General is amongst the members, and they have set a number of meetings precisely trying to address, well, I think it's about the future of internet, but in particular in respect of ICANN and how ICANN can gain in those aspects you mentioned. So I think it's important reflections they're carrying, and we hope to see good outcomes out of those discussions.
Any other responses? Or please.
Sorry, if I can just add something. So 2003, 2005 were an important turning point in internet governance. It was a time when there was consensus internationally, a delicate consensus, shall we say, or even perhaps a delicate truce. But it was important because it recognised the WSIS recognised the respective roles of all of the stakeholders, which is really quite a milestone. But the difficulty we're facing, and there are many of them, is that it's almost 10 years on. The landscape is very much more complex. The internet is very different from what it was in 2003, 2005. Look at the way that it's used, the applications, the services. So that's one layer of complexity. But it's also complex because we've seen the stakeholder groups evolve and grow in that time. We see many more intergovernmental organisations that say that they have internet policy as part of their remit. And maybe there's a little bit of competition there. We see civil society is not exactly the same as civil society as it was in 2003, 2005. We see many different groups of civil society, might be human rights activists, more consumer groups, and so on. We also see businesses coming together as a community. We see the formation of the internet technical community. But getting back to legitimacy, and that is a very important and a question, and one that I think the internet governance community as a whole should have a serious think about. It's something that we need to think about on a daily basis. And some of the things that come with legitimacy, of course, are openness, transparency, inclusiveness, and other principles like that.
It's a pretty good response, but I was being told here on the one side that there's lots of competition between international organizations to be relevant in the internet policy space, and I think that's a perfectly legitimate point. But we have somebody from an international organization here, so I was wondering if she'd like to respond to that.
Do you want me to come back to the 13th and 14th of June dates, or?
No, not at all. This is a more general question. I mean, you could say that the many international organizations out there, whether they be the ITU or others, have all realized that there's a new game in town and it's very interesting and attractive, and it's called internet policy. And if we can be involved in that, we'll get lots of money.
Yeah, but the international organization you're referring to have very different mandates and objectives. And I think that the Council of Europe doesn't have much competition in that field, at least we do at regional level, which is just what I mentioned, but I think there is a total acknowledgement of the legitimacy of our contribution to the discussion. So I did not feel particularly threatened by Christine's comments.
Well, no, but not at all. You're the one actor of those international organizations who actually genuinely consider human rights, which is perhaps, compared to the others, a slight value add. Please.
Could I add to what Sophie was saying, is from my experience in the Council of Europe and the parts that I've been involved in, what I do see is that the Council of Europe is very mindful, particularly in the data protection sphere, of other activities that are happening in other parts of the world. And I think on the point about international consensus, I don't think we're going to, I may be wrong, this is a personal view, I think international consensus is going to come from consensus in different places that are compatible.
Are there any further questions in the room? Over there, please. Kasia, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Kasia Szymilewicz, Panoptykon Foundation. I just allow myself one general comment as somebody who is from privacy community more than from internet governance and who attended at least 4 of these conferences. I must confess that I stopped going there, and not for a reason that you discussed already, which is the kind of talk show. I did enjoy all these discussions, and I do believe that This is the best place where you can get educated about internet-related issues, including privacy, and get an incredible network of experts to work with. So there are many benefits that I see from going there, but the big question is the one you started discussing right now, legitimacy, but also the way that we as civil society are presented once we get there. So for me the big question is the representation of civil society at all these IGFs, including for financial reasons, because it's quite expensive thing to go there and obviously nobody gives us grants to do so. But also once we get there, there might be this misrepresentation that people of the internet are represented and they take part in discussions, which is not really the case. That's one thing. The second thing is that it's still power struggle as everywhere. So at the end of the day, if we have a solution, which is a rare outcome, but if we do have one, well, we tend to lose. I mean, that was my feeling, that the civil society is not the strongest voice represented during IGFs. So there are these plenty of risks that I see as civil society representative, but going there and legitimizing the process that is at the end not beneficial for the values that I defend. I don't have a clear solution. Not going there is not the best one either, but these are serious concerns that I see I wanted to share. Thank you.
Meryem, I think you're perfect to respond to that.
Maybe a quick comment to this. I agree that the barriers to the entrance to this kind of settings or meetings, it's valid for the technical meetings, but also the IGF, the barriers at the entrance are high, not only because of the price of your travel ticket, but they are also high, these barriers at entrance, to go lobby the European Commission, for instance, or the European Parliament on one issue. It's the same problem. Also, the representativeness of the civil society is a question that you can raise at the IGF, but you can raise also in lobbying the European Commission and campaigning. So I think we are not going to solve the legitimacy issue today, but maybe the solution to the legitimacy is this two-step process. The talk shop, the discussion, the discussion of the agenda, maybe the agenda setting, and then institutionalizing this process or some of the outcome. We have the example of the Council of Europe. We can also discuss the OECD example, and then at this level, the intergovernmental organization, we have some more democratic, maybe probably not ideal, but more democratic process. And I like to say that internet governance is a political construct. I'm also a political scientist, but a political construct in progress. And I'm not sure we don't have the same problem in other settings or in other processes.
Thanks. I think that was an extremely relevant response. I'm not sure it quite fully, because there's a separate issue, which is the issue of co-optation. And that's that essentially the danger of civil society or business coming into these scenes, saying lots of nice things, going to lots of conferences, drinking lots of coffee, but not actually being, so business, in the case of business, it's actually useful, because then business doesn't have to do anything. It just says nice things, but then things don't change. In the case of civil society, they're not actually on the street organizing demonstrations. They're having coffee with other people and being co-opted.
Most of them do. Most of them do at the global level, and much more probably than we can see in Europe. If you take some big civil society or organization active in the global south, they really do campaign, strong campaign, strong demonstration, etc. towards there are also more grassroots organizations in these settings than in some others. So I think we have a global problem of legitimacy, or of democracy, I would say, to encompass of all the issues, but not more at the IGF, not more in internet governance than in other settings.
So to take your point, then, on the panel that we had in Bali, then we had the OECD, sorry, Sophie, and we had the UN Global Pulse, and we had Privacy International, and we've met with Privacy International before to discuss many of the privacy security issues that arise from big data, and that was a very genuine and worthwhile exercise from my point of view, and these conversations are ongoing. But to raise one of your other issues, which is about how can civil society, privacy groups, advocates afford to go. Then at one of the regional IGFs that I've been in, one of the discussions was about the fact that this IGF very nearly didn't happen because of a funding issue. And there are problems in the way that it's funded. And perhaps if we resolve those funding issues, because industry does want to fund, then in a blind way, then perhaps part of that funding helps to get privacy advocates and civil society there who don't have big budgets, for example.
Can I just jump in there? Because at least in my experience of the IGF, it's mainly people who look like you and me, so white males, and that's a large part of the conference, and that's part of its problem. So finding ways, is this GSMA saying they want to support this process to make sure there's not just privacy advocates in the room, but also more people from the Global South?
Well, I do think, I mean, this is not the GSMA. I don't attribute everything I say to the GSMA, by the way, but I think one of the challenges, I mean, I discussed this earlier. I mean, you know, in Barcelona next month, we hold a government leadership forum. We're bringing representatives from 148 countries, mainly, who are not mainly from Europe. And that's a fantastic opportunity. And there needs to be more of that at the IGF, I think.
Okay, with those comments, I think we bring this session to an end. And I do hope that it was a legitimate session with legitimate processes and legitimate outcomes. We at least avoided a very entangled acronym jungle. So I would at least congratulate everyone on the panel for doing so, and those of you who listened and contributed otherwise. Thank you.